Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Creating with Impact podcast, where we explore the intersections of mental health and creativity for musicians and artists. Today, we have an incredible guest, Michael Rempel, who is the former guitarist of the band Lotus, and he is now on a journey as a mindfulness and life coach. So we'll dive into his experiences in the music world, his path to mindfulness, and how he balances mental well-being and a creative life. So whether you're a musician or a multi-passionate creator, this is going to be an episode full of insights and inspiration. So I'm really, really excited for you guys to hear this interview. So without further ado, let's get into it. The name of the podcast is Creating with Impact. So a lot of it has to do with creativity and kind of like making a positive impact on the world, but also taking care of yourself in the process and not losing too much of yourself in that process, I feel like. So I guess this is kind of like a two-part question, but what does creativity and kind of just creating something with a positive impact mean to you? And then do you see creativity as possibly therapeutic, or do you think creativity comes from a space of being more or feeling more balanced?
Well, it seems like the creative impulse is a natural aspect of just being human. And, some of us have a particular art form, and in my case, it's music. And so there's something about just letting something that's so innate manifest and flow and have its own voice that inevitably, I think, has impact for people. Authenticity can be felt. And if there's a genuineness and sincerity of spirit that goes into the creative process, I do feel like that is translated. And it's like a deep human thing that we are inevitably impacting each other. And, art is a powerful way to impact each other. So I think in many ways it's inherently positive because it's a way that we experience connection to our fellow humans. But also, too, like for me, making music, there's an earnest desire to make a joyful noise and to make something that can, lift one's mood and inspire the listener's own creativity. For me, listening to music can create a kind of buoyancy in my own experience. I'm more excited to push my own edges or lean into a difficult situation if I've got this powerful energy called music that can sort of feed me and fuel me and carry me into whatever it is I need to do in my life. So there's a little bit of an answer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so interesting that you brought up kind of the human kind of need to create and to connect with each other that way too. Because I feel like there's got to be some, biological aspect of that, of wanting to stick together in a group and relate to each other in that way. So it's so interesting to me to kind of talk about things from that aspect too, where it's such a natural thing that people do. And it, in some ways, I feel like it's kind of innately human, where we're like the only species really that kind of does that. But then in others, you like think about it and you're like, oh, well, when birds wake up in the morning, they start singing, or there's other kind of connections to that as well, which is really, really cool to me.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a part of our nature. I imagine music has been a part of the human experience from the very beginning. And yeah, I think it speaks to something very deep within us.
Exactly. I totally agree. So kind of coming from more of a mental health background with that, do you kind of see creativity as something that can be very therapeutic, or do you think it kind of comes from this feeling of feeling more balanced and just kind of more connected to everything? Or do you think it can also kind of help create that feeling?
My impulse is just to say yes to both. They both sound true to me. Yeah.
So I guess kind of, I know you'd mentioned kind of like being in the flow when you're creating, whether that's, writing a song or improvising in just the moment. What do you think that feeling of like being in the flow is? Like, do you think it's kind of going back to that connecting to some kind of deeper thing? Or do you think it's just, being really skilled in what you're doing and just feeling good that you're good at it, or some mix of everything?
Yeah, I think flow states, I mean, so much is captured in that word flow. I want to bring in the word fluidity. It seems like a flow state is a state of being where there's just not much friction happening in the sort of output phase of experience. There's like a spontaneity, there's a just happeningness, and it seems like flow is when all cylinders are firing, and that can yield kinds of different states of consciousness, like unitive type of experiences, emerging experiences, like a dissolving of ego. And I think there's something just very natural about it. I think in so many ways, it's our nature to be in states of being without that kind of friction where we're getting in our own way. So I know that's one way I think about flow of expression, is just like the spontaneous just happening of our own nature, and not having certain aspects of our experience get in the way of that expression. Yeah, and that can also be developed too, I think, over time. Like you mentioned, skill. As we put so many hours into a thing, then it's like, yeah, putting hours into an instrument is part of what reduces that friction aspect. So there's definitely a correlation between time spent and the capacity for that kind of pure flow or spontaneity of expression.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I think I totally agree with you when you're kind of being in the flow. And I feel like it makes you feel more connected to everything in general, because it's like it almost doesn't feel like it's you creating this. I feel like it's very, to kind of bring in the mindfulness aspect, I feel like it's very kind of like a meditative process. Like it almost feels like automatic. But then it's funny because if you start to kind of, or at least in my experience, if you start to kind of mess with that and start to try to plan out certain things, I feel like it kind of takes out the magic of kind of being in that state. I don't know if you've kind of experienced the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think we actually have control over it. The moment you try to kind of grab onto it, like you recognize you're in a flow state, and it's like, oh, some part of you might want to like, oh, I want to make sure this can last. I want to stay here because this is nice. The moment that happens, you've disrupted the happening. So in some ways, like I think of it as a kind of grace. It's like, we can prime ourselves and we can set ourselves up to be available to those flow states, but ultimately I don't know how much control we actually have over them. And we just, we can know that it's a thing that happens and tell the universe we're willing to be a vessel for that, and hope for the best.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can be scary to be in that kind of unitive experience. I think it can be challenging for our egos who like to think that they're in charge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so funny too, because I feel like the ego part of us too, I feel like is that part that's kind of getting attached to like, oh, it has to be this way, or I want to sound like this, or so I think it's definitely like getting attached to the way that something's supposed to sound, or even if you're writing a song and then you hear it back and you're like, that's not what I had in my head, but like it works. But I feel like that also kind of like applies in life too, where it's like you realize you do have control over some things, but you have much less control over everything else. And it's like the second that you start trying to get attached to those things that you don't really have control over, that's when it kind of creates that friction that you were talking about. Yeah. It's so funny how some of these things just in music, I feel like they can reflect in our daily lives too. It's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you searching for a natural way to find peace, focus, and balance in your busy life? Look no further than Monk Personal Essential Oil Diffusers. Whether you need to unwind after a long day, boost your energy, or simply find a moment of calm amidst the chaos, Monk has the perfect blend for you. Say goodbye to stress and embrace a more mindful approach to life. And as an added bonus, you can use code CreatingWithImpact for 10% off. Your journey to a happier and healthier you starts now. this kind of like brings up kind of another question. And this is something that I think about a lot, and especially in the music world, and honestly, just like any kind of more entrepreneurial career, really. And that's kind of the conflict, maybe conflict. I don't know if conflict's the right word, but just the differences between internal and external validation, where kind of not really going back to the attachment thing, but you're kind of like with external validation, you're almost like more attached to kind of how everyone else is viewing you and kind of what the society definition of success is, versus like internal validation where it's like, am I doing this because this is something that I love to do and just no matter what I'm just going to do it, or is it something where I'm kind of putting my own definition of success kind of more in terms of like what society thinks? And I feel like that's a thing that comes up all the time in like music careers. Like I see it all the time with bands or individual artists where it's like they basically define their success on social media followers or something like that. But what do you think about kind of that whole internal versus external validation thing?
I know, I think my impulse is to say something like I would encourage any creator to really fortify their own sense of validation and have that be sort of the North Star, I guess, just to stay connected to your own why, like your reasons for doing it. And how is it feeling? Is it feeling true? Is it feeling alive? To me, that's the most important thing. And if you're wanting to create a career out of something like music, I think there's just a kind of humility involved where we have to make room for the fact that it's not it's not actually up to us, and we can do all the steps that we can do in as skillful a way as we can to continue putting our heart into our creative process and make the connections we need to make and stay real, stay authentic, stay human all along the way. And yeah, having enough humility to recognize if it's not looking the way you want it to look in terms of, say, monetary success. And I think there's also something to be said about just keeping feedback channels open, like having a community of trusted friends. Maybe it's like a community of trusted artists. Maybe it's an artist collective of some kind. I don't know. Where you absolutely know that you can get honest feedback about what you're producing and be in a creative, engaged, iterative process related to your own whatever it is you're doing, and like being willing to be in a student mind about it and to receive feedback from other creators that you respect, who you know, and this is the most important part, are going to be honest with you. So I think there's something about that that feels like important to say here, like a true openness to feedback.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I feel like having that honest feedback is one of the more challenging things too, because I feel like sometimes, especially in the beginning, you're like surrounded with friends and, playing for fun and everyone's like, yeah, you sound great. But it's awesome to like have that honest feedback like, hey, have you guys thought about doing this instead of this or different options? And again, I feel like that's the same in life too. It's like you always need that friend that's there that's going to be 100% honest with you, whether you are, comfortable hearing it or not. And kind of on that subject, I really like that you brought up kind of the learning mindset, kind of more of the beginner mindset too, because I feel like that's kind of where the growth happens really, because you're not taking information for granted and you're always learning, which is definitely really good. So kind of in those situations where maybe you're not feeling either connected to like what you're doing or the environment or anything like that, when do you kind of know when it's time to kind of take a step back or step aside or do something else or maybe work on the same thing in a different way? When do you kind of start to know that?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any kind of concrete answer to that question. It seems like it's going to be absolutely unique for each person. I think it probably just requires a radical honesty with oneself. Or possibly if a person feels confused about if they want to continue a creative project, maybe just like creating a context shift. I don't know, like going on a camping trip or something, like getting out into the wild and just like setting aside all of the questions. Or maybe like heading out on a backpacking trip, might seed, sort of put the question into the universe. Am I to continue this creative project? And you go and you sort of let the question live in you, and you commune with the land and just see what happens. It's like just sort of like sign up for I don't know, like the mystery of existence, to maybe offer some pointer. There's different strategies you could take to get some perspective. But mostly, I think it just comes down to just a real radical honesty with oneself. And for me personally, a guiding question would be, does this feel alive for me? And if it doesn't feel alive, like, yeah, maybe it's time to make a pivot.
That makes total sense. I feel like a lot of that, it sounds like, is kind of just being open to the possibility that it's either time to change or step aside or think of like another project or approach it from a different angle, just kind of like being open to whatever comes up, really.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like a porous way of being, where it's like you might have an orientation to just existing, that this is an experiment and I'm willing to just try things out. Yeah.
Exactly. So I guess I've been kind of tiptoeing around this question the whole time, but how can, I guess, people use kind of various lessons from things like mindfulness, meditation, that kind of thing, to their benefit, especially when they're in kind of a more creative pursuit, whether it's, music or just being kind of like that entrepreneurial career?
I imagine there's lots of different ways to answer that question too, but the first thing that came up was, from a mindfulness perspective, mindful awareness sets you up to be attuned to your experience in present time, such that you can nurture what seems generative and helpful, and protect against or mitigate against what doesn't. For example, it can be easy to ruminate around whatever fears or insecurities we might have as an artist. And we're like, we say we have a show coming up and we're anxious about it. We can get caught so easily and for very long periods of time feeling anxious about something. So mindfulness is one of those tools. It's like you see it clearly, and through practice over time, you have this capacity to drop it and to just be more skillful, more awake, more aware, more attuned, more willing to just feel the feeling in the moment and let it go, versus getting caught. And so, I mean, that example, in terms of our relationship to thoughts itself, our relationship to rumination, basically is an ever-present possibility or ever-present invitation that mindfulness can, attune us to the here now and help us stay more and more skillful, more and more of the time, more and more graceful, more and more of the time. Probably more to say, but I'll leave it there for now.
I feel like it's a very, very big question. So
maybe I'll say one other thing was just coming up is just from a kind of practical standpoint. Like I'm imagining being here in my music room here, and it can be easy to say if I'm producing music on a computer, which I do a lot of, it can be easy to get fatigued. And so mindfulness can help us like recognize that sooner. Sort of like body fatigue can translate into a mental fatigue very quickly. And it's like, well, maybe I just need to get out and, run around the block, stretch for a second, and then come back, and building that into, the creative process in terms of just tracking, is the energy flowing here or not? It's another way mindful awareness can help us stay constructive.
Awesome. Yeah, especially with staring at a computer screen, I feel like it can definitely start to wear on you pretty fast. Are you looking for fresh, delicious produce at unbeatable prices? Misfits Market delivers high-quality organic fruits and veggies straight to your door. Plus, you'll save money and reduce food waste. Use the link in the show notes for $10 off your order. Dive into deliciously different today with Misfits Market. You kind of actually just pretty much answered the next question, but I'm just going to ask it anyway, just in case it kind of reframes maybe like another answer. But are there kind of specific like practices that you follow to kind of make sure that music doesn't turn into a stressor and is rather kind of a sense of joy? And it sounds like one of them is stepping away from it for a second, kind of managing those fatigue levels, first of all. That's huge.
Yeah, one thing that comes up is imagining like getting fatigued with, say, if you're producing a song and like maybe you feel stuck on it. A strategy could be a willingness to set this down, just set it down, maybe come back to it next week. How to keep it a source of joy? Was that part of the question?
Hmm.
It occurs to me that you could treat the creative process like a practice. It's a possibility. It's like maybe every time you go to pick up your instrument, maybe before you pick up the instrument, you say a little prayer to yourself, like whatever that might mean to you, or set an intention, or remind yourself of why you do it. Even if it's a simple statement like, this is for the love of it. And then you pick up the instrument. For me, sitting in front of the computer, it could be a practice. Like, I'm just going to like love this right now because I can. And I'm going to translate my love of the creative process into whatever I'm doing. And I make it explicit. So those are some like strategical type things that come up in terms of, if you call that mindfulness. It's a kind of mindfulness. It's sort of like, in unified mindfulness, they call it nurturing positivity. In Buddhism, there are practices like called metta, loving kindness meditation. So it's that kind of stance where it's like, I'm going to intentionally create a little wave of well-being in my senses right now, here at the beginning, as I start a creative project.
So you're kind of like cultivating that sense, like each time you kind of put that into a routine, whether it's, practice routine, or if you're like writing a song or something, you're kind of practicing making that a joyful sort of creation.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it can feel a little clunky for some people. It can feel inauthentic to try to generate positivity. It's not abnormal if you don't feel good, you don't feel good, like, but like, so I'm always a proponent of, hey, yeah, let's make room for whatever is. Let's be with what is and be with it skillfully. We know so much about the brain these days, and we tend to have this negativity bias. So because we understand most, basically, it seems like part of the human thing in these days is that we have a negativity bias. And so because we know that, we can start training our new neural pathways towards well-being, towards the inherently good. And we actually can turn that into a practice so that those are the circuits that are firing. And, if we don't turn it into a practice, I mean, the negativity bias it's inevitably going to win out. So it's helpful to know that.
Definitely. Kind of going off of that, do you think that the process of, or the musical process itself, can kind of help facilitate that?
Probably in terms of
Mm.
it being a nourishing experience to express. Most of us make music because we enjoy it. So on that level, yes.
Awesome. So, kind of talking a little bit more about kind of the larger music community, creative community, things like that. What kind of role, and I think we may have touched on this a little bit, but what kind of role do you think that music community kind of helps? What kind of role do you think that community plays kind of in general in just kind of the overall well-being and kind of growth and connection of like musicians and fans kind of overall?
When you say that community, you're
Hmm.
referring to.
Just like the music community, or just really any kind of creative artist community, things like that.
Yeah, I was talking to my partner yesterday about this actually, and she brought up a beautiful point, and I resonated with it. I think that one aspect that's at least possible is a sense of belonging. There's a way that people have, at least it would seem like this in the Lotus community that I was part of, like people had a sense of family, being part of something bigger and being deeply connected to a community through a shared love of music. And that is healing. That can be very a healing, beautiful thing. We want and need and long to be held in community, in loving community, ideally. So there's that. I think there could also be a flip side of that too, where it's like maybe it seems like you've got a good community, but maybe it's not always like a super healthy community too. What else? Yeah, I think circling back to what we said at the beginning of the conversation, I think it comes back to musical spaces being places that we find, at least potentially, very, very deep nourishment. Yeah, another piece would be, I think, we can experience like non-ordinary states of being through music, kind of transcendent states of being, which can be healing for us. Not always. If it turns into like a thing where you need to get the fix, it's like you need certain conditions and circumstances to experience that, where I would suggest that transcendent experiences are available anytime, anywhere, in any place, in any circumstance. But, a lot of people do find it through music and dancing. So, I think that is a healing experience when we touch into a sense of feeling connected in community and deeply interrelated. It's like a perceptually we experience our interbeing directly, and so that's healing.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. And yeah, I think it does kind of circle back to that kind of innate humanness too, where, it's like music's been a part of us for pretty much as long as we've existed, which is really, really cool. So, kind of switching gears for a second. So, I know I had mentioned before, kind of like, when do you know that it's time to kind of step away from something or reframe it? Is there anything that kind of helps with, for example, just kind of like a more personal thing? Like if I kind of stepping away from one creative aspect of my life, sometimes I can feel like I'm just starting all over again with another project or something like that. So, are there any ways that people can kind of get through kind of that fear of restarting or kind of switching gears or approaching something from a different angle?
Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of possibilities here. Might be easier said than done, but I just think that there is something to be said about trusting the process. Change and the unknown is generally scary for most humans, yet we seem to need it and we are drawn towards it. So I would want to just normalize the fear that anyone's experiencing about transition and not make the mistake of thinking that whatever creative project already happened was a waste of time, because that's, just like get clear on what you learned and what, or the way that it nourished you. Just keeping it all in perspective, like having the capacity to zoom out, see the big picture, and really just stay curious about oneself. And, curiosity is this, I don't know, kind of like miracle energy as far as I'm concerned. Like, if you can just stay curious about everything and all the time, you can stay curious, like, we're going to feel alive and we're going to not get caught in self blame or shame or whatever it might be. And the other thing I would add too is just in terms of navigating fear is like getting support, whether that's a coach or a therapist or some kind of group, just like connecting with people about your unique flavors of fear, getting witnessed in it and having conversations about it goes so far. You're just like letting it be true, letting it be real, letting it be open, letting yourself be seen in it. It's a powerful, powerful way to metabolize fear.
Definitely. And I feel like kind of fear can feel kind of isolating too, because I've noticed either personally or with my friends, it's like whenever you're kind of scared of something, you almost kind of go into like a shell. And it's kind of awesome actually that the kind of one of the solutions to that is to do the opposite or practice doing the opposite, because it can be really hard.
It can be.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
but it all kind of comes back to that, connection thing. That's huge. Alice mushroom chocolates are crafted with the finest quality ingredients and infused with the essence of premium mushrooms to support sleep, desire, and energy. These chocolates offer a decadent fusion of rich cocoa and earthy goodness. Whether you're indulging in a sweet craving or seeking a natural way to unwind, Alice mushroom chocolates are the perfect choice. Order yours today at alicemushrooms.com and elevate your snacking experience. As an added bonus, you can use Creating with Impact 15 for 15% off your order. So I kind of wanted to close with a fan question, and it is a two-parter. So we'll just start with the first part. So Nate wanted to know about your experience finding balance as a touring musician, and he was asking if you had any tips to kind of power through that, and was asking, is it ultimately worth the sacrifices? How and when do you know? And we kind of touched on that a little bit, but I guess specifically related to touring.
I notice I wish I could talk to Nate about where he's coming from or what his situation is. For me, it comes down to practices. not all bands, depending on where they are in their development, and like, if they're a touring band, that can look all kinds of different ways, from throwing stuff in a car to being on a bus or flying. It can look all kinds of different ways, but different individuals need different things. I would say, in my experience, I was a person that needed space. Like, I realized I needed quiet time, and I needed to have a relationship with my body. Like, for the longest time on Lotus tour, I would seek out yoga classes. Wherever city, I'd always do a search and look, where's the closest yoga studio, and I'd walk there or take an Uber or something. So I was able to establish a routine. But yeah, like maintaining a healthy connection with body, yeah, paying attention to what you're putting in your body, just, yeah, getting to know yourself and what is supporting your aliveness, your wellness, and what's not. Just tracking that real time and responding accordingly. That might be the best thing I could say.
Definitely. So just kind of like being aware of what you personally need, or because I feel like sometimes that could be hard to do where you're like, I don't know, I've had this happen where basically I like forget to drink water and then I work through lunch and then I'm like wondering why I'm exhausted and frustrated out of nowhere. So I feel like it can even come down to something simple like that, it definitely can be hard to implement. And especially on tour too, because you're more limited in kind of your options.
Yeah. I would want to frame it all as just a continual practice. Like, I'm going to practice being attuned to my experience in real time, moment by moment, for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
It's a big task. And it's a practice. We call it a
Definitely.
practice for a reason. And the other thing, too, I would say in relation to that is just like even paying attention to your breath, and like having a basic willingness to just, okay, I'm going to tune to the breath, and I'm going to maybe regulate it a little bit, just slow it down, maybe extending the exhale a little bit. Just doing that for a few minutes, it can have really radical implications in terms of our state of being. So, like, whatever is happening, no matter how crazy it is, no matter how little space you've had, or how long you've been on the go, or how many hours you've been awake, the breath can be this really profound tool to shift and support our experience.
That's awesome. And it's always accessible too.
Exactly.
So kind of part two of his question was more kind of on the music side of things and the creative process. And he wanted to know what drives your creative process and motivates you when you're writing, and where do you find your melodic inspirations?
I love that question. There's different things that feed my creative process, I would say. Like, I have a strong relationship with the wild world, with nature, and like prioritizing immersive experiences in the land. Like, I'm a backpacker. I'll like go out and set up a base camp and just like be, sometimes for days. I have a relationship with the land of the desert in Utah, and I've gone backpacking. I've done, anywhere between like a 4 and 7 night backpacking trip in Utah, like every year for the last 10 years. I just go down there and just listen and be and feel and wander and explore and drink the water out of the stream. And it's sometimes the way when I sit down to make music, it's just like, I mean, there's so much that's living inside of me, so much enchantment that's living inside of me from those adventures. And so it's like sometimes I feel like I'm expressing the desert. It's a landscape that I love, and there's a quality of enchantment, but it's, I could say it's like, oh, I'm channeling that into my music, which I think is in partly true, but it's just more like I'm just enchanted with being alive, then inevitably comes through the music. What else? Oh, I have a routine I do almost every day, like a journaling practice where it includes like visualization and gratitude and affirmations. And it's just doing that every day. It's a game changer. Like, I don't know, maybe it's been 3 or 4 years I've been doing that. And so it has a very direct impact on my sense of vitality and my enchantment with the world. And then melodically, yeah, I don't know what to say. I think I'm a huge Pat Metheny fan. I love Pat Metheny. And I don't often think about it directly, like where does my sense of melody come from? But there's been times over the years where I've transcribed guitar solos. I know I transcribed at least part of it a long time ago, a solo by Brad Barr. He was a band called The Slip. He's now in a band called the Barr Brothers. But I was learning like Trey licks back in the day. Fish was a big influence for me in the early days. So there's a handful of guitarists that I learned licks from, but yeah, I don't often think of it like directly, like, oh, this is where my melodic sense comes from. It's more like, I just listen to the music that I listen to. I love what I love to hear, and then whatever comes out of me is whatever comes out of me. you know.
That's so funny. I feel like that does kind of circle back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning with flow states and everything too, where it's like you kind of learn from your actual musical inspirations, and then when the time comes, it's like you're in the flow state and you're, kind of going from there. Awesome. Well, just to kind of close out, where can people find you? I know you had that group coming up in September too, if you wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, so my website is michaelrempel.com. MikeRempel.com will also take you there. Yeah, most people know me as Mike, but I've been using Michael in recent years. It's just a preference. But yeah, Mike Rempel or michaelrempel.com will take you to what I'm currently up to. Mostly focused on personal, like one-on-one coaching work. I love supporting people in their process. Whatever that people want to explore, whether it's relationships, like career stuff, creative stuff. I just love getting to know people's worlds and being in a kind of a exploratory process with people where it's just like things just, it's just this amazing experience to watch people like just tap into their own creative life force and their own wisdom. So that's what it's all about, the coaching stuff for me. And I really enjoy that. And yeah, there's a local circling group. Circling is a relational practice. It's a kind of, I sometimes just generalize it as like a relational mindfulness practice. It's kind of nuanced. It's very unique, and it's just an interesting kind of shape-shifty. It can be a practice that can yield like non-ordinary experiences and insight into your own human experience. Something I got interested in back in 2019. I did a training, and I even missed a Lotus show because I had a training. Lotus at that time, I think it was I think they played Camp Bisco maybe. It was Bisco or there was some festival they played. I couldn't attend because I was doing this training and circling. The other thing I should add, like I have some music coming out too, some ambient music.
Nice.
And some other electronic stuff that I co-produced with a good friend of mine. Really, really, really excited to debut some new facets of my musical identity, and it's music that I'm like really, really deeply connected with. Yeah, so I'm thrilled that there's some movement happening there as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to listen. As always, you can find me at creatingwithimpact.com or on Instagram at creatingwithimpactpod. You can also check out Creating with Impact on Patreon at patreon.com/creatingwithimpact, where you can become a subscriber and get all sorts of extra content and resources. 10% of all of our Patreon proceeds benefit Mental Health America, which advances the mental health and well-being of all people living in the U.S. through public education, research, advocacy, and public policy, and direct service. Leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast or join our Patreon, and we'll give you a personal shout out on the show. As always, if you have any stories or successes you'd like to share, or if you'd just like to get in on the conversation, you can email creatingwithimpactpod@gmail.com.